Hello and welcome to another episode of the PopCon podcast brought to you by Popular Conservatism. My name is Andrew Allison and I am Head of Campaigns. My guest today is Bill Etheridge. Bill comes from Wolverhampton and spent 20 years selling steel. In 2009, he became a member of the Conservative Party, but left the Conservative Party a couple of years later and joined UKIP, where he was the West Midlands organiser for the party. 2014 was a year of big change for Bill. He became a councillor, but he also became one of the West Midlands MEPs for UKIP. A couple of years later, he actually stood to become leader of the party and lost out to Diane James. Not that her leadership lasted very long, a few days or a few weeks. Bill left UKIP along with many other people, including Nigel Farage during Gerard Batten's leadership, but rejoined again when Neil Hamilton became leader. Coming full circle, Bill is now back in the Conservative Party and a member in Dudley. Bill, thank you very much for joining me and welcome.
Hi, and thank you for having me on.
We're discussing before we started recording that you come from a very political family, but yet it was a very working class family, working class Tory family. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, by political, we've always spoken about it around the dinner table. I was the first one to be, well, you could say brave, or others might say stupid enough to put their head above the parapet and actually try to stand to represent something. But the family roots on both sides of my family, one which was from the Black Country and one which was from the Northwest, Bolton and Liverpool areas, all the way back, as far as we remember, to the dawn of the 20th century, every single one of them was a Conservative, including a great-grandfather who famously was a trade unions steward, but also went around telling his men that they all had to vote Conservative. So I was literally the first member of my family in around about 100 years who didn't vote Conservative when I joined UKIP.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I think my grandparents and great-grandparents might have been spinning in their graves at the time, but I felt that I was still being Conservative, even though I wasn't voting for the Conservative Party. I think that was an important differential.
Yeah, it is an important differential, Bill. But as I said in the introduction, you joined the Conservative Party in 2009, and you've told me privately that you met people, heroes, I guess, really, Margaret Thatcher and Norman Tebbit, being two of them.
Yeah.
So what motivated you to say, right, I'm joining this party now, and therefore I'm going to do something. I want to make a difference. What motivated you to do that?
Well, initially, I mean, I'd spent a lot of time working on the Cameron campaign in 2010 as a campaign executive and a council candidate for the Conservatives. They put me in the most Labour part of the borough, very kind of. But after that, I was holding meetings. I was holding political meetings and inviting people to come. And they were along the lines of what I would class as classic conservatism, free speech. I was very keen and excited by the ideas of the Freedom Association and the campaign against political correctness. And it turned out that actually the majority of people coming to those meetings were UKIP members, not Conservatives, even though it was in a Conservative club. And I was involved in a thing for the campaign against political correctness. It was a famous thing. You only have to look on Google. It's the first picture you see of me, where hundreds and hundreds of people of all different ethnicities held up a gollywog doll. And it was part of a conversation about how political correctness has changed perceptions. And if people had gone into the small print and have seen me saying, well, when I was a child, I didn't think this was anything to do with the human or offensive. And now I'm adult, the conversation has changed and we understand. And this, the power of words, and the power of words to politically correct influence the discourse. But of course, that led to me being in trouble with the powers that be in the Conservative Party. And I thought, you know what? Nigel Farage I'd already met him and asked me to join. All the local people who supported me were UKIP. Well, you know what? If they're going to be like that and basically called me a racist without a trial or any form of hearing, and were trying to purge me, I thought, okay, all right, you'll have your own way. But to coin a phrase, I'll be back. And I was, and for a good few years, my part of UKIP in the West Midlands was pretty successful, and the Conservatives in that area, I think, rued their decision. But we look back on that now as ancient history.
Was that when Saeed Avarsi was chairman of the Conservative Party?
I think she was somewhere near the top of it, yeah. Where I'd already been told off because I'd tried to arrange for one of my great heroes, Lord Tebbit, to give a talk in Dudley, and I'd been called up in front of the local branch and given a disciplinary hearing for being a right-wing extremist for asking Lord Tebbit to speak. And I thought at the time, we've got a problem here.
Yeah, no, most certainly did have a problem. So then you successfully, led the UKIP effort in your part of the West Midlands, or indeed across the West Midlands, in general. So were you asked if you would like to put your name forward to become a candidate to become an MEP, or was it a burning ambition of yours, Bill? What I really want to do is go to Brussels and Strasbourg.
Well, actually, I did have, and it never dies, does it? Your ambitions. I had many ambitions. One of which was to play cricket for England. Another one was to be in a spaceship with William Shatner. But the one that might have been more realistic at the time was to be an MP, because not only do I believe that Westminster is where it matters and where it should matter if you're British, but there's something about walking those hallowed halls. Someone who came from a comprehensive school in the middle of Wolverhampton, who really understands everyday life. I felt like I could make a difference. So becoming a member of European Parliament and a council on the same day, incidentally, was a stepping stone, in my opinion. I was doing that, even though the wages for an MP were much, much, much less. I was trying to use that to get enough momentum to get to Westminster. And, I managed to do the councillor and MEP, but not the MP. So, as Meatloaf would say, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
True. I spent 5 months in Brussels working for an MEP right at the very end. You spent 5 years in Brussels and Strasbourg. I think people need to remember that the European Parliament is based in Strasbourg. That's where the vast majority of the meetings, the full plenary sessions of the Parliament take place. From my point of view, I thought that you either go to Brussels and you think, God, this is great. Look at how much money I'm earning. Gosh. And as a staffer, you say, God, 10% tax. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to dine in the best restaurants. I'm going to have a really fantastic time. And indeed, you can. And I can understand how people then just get drawn into that and would never, ever want to leave. Now, a part of me is a little bit like that. I enjoy a good bottle of claret. I enjoy a little bit of fine dining. We're all a little bit like that to a certain extent. But I think what I found the most repulsive was the cleaner who was on contract, so not employed by the European Parliament. It was a contract that the European Parliament had. That cleaner who came into my office was paid a pittance and was paying a hell of a lot more tax than me, certainly as a percentage. And then I looked around at all these people who just were divorced from reality. They were divorced from everything that's going around them. And I was completely repulsed by it. And that's why I said to Brian Monteith, I was working for at the time for the Brexit Party. I said to Brian, I said, if we don't leave, as in the UK doesn't leave on the 31st of January, I said, I will be. Because I just cannot stick it here any longer. I was separate from my family as well. That was hard. But I think even as a single bloke, I just want to get back out again and back to the UK. How did you find it all?
Well, there's no disputing it's a great place to be. But different to many MEPs, I would go out there on a Monday and come back on a Thursday. And then from Thursday night through to Sunday, I'd be catching up on my council work. And I would be trying to get myself out to see the people in the area. And I've always said, and used to say it regularly, it's the best way of keeping your feet right on the ground. When you might have been out there being lauded and called sir and driving around in chauffeur-driven limos in Brussels or Strasbourg, you get back to the Black Country and you walk into a pub and someone say, "Oi, what are you doing for a living? Lazy bugger." And the moment that you get back to reality, it cools you down. And as regards the money, yeah, it was good, man. And I'm not going to make it. But anyone who knows me knows I like a good time. So I had a few drinks and I had some nice meals. But I spent an absolute fortune of that money on UKIP causes. So if there was a council election coming up, people in my area, I would make donations from that, from my wages, before anyone says it, not on expenses, from my wages. And I self-subsidised 2 runs at Westminster. So we're talking a lot of money. So I'm probably the only MEP you'll ever speak to who went in poor and came out poor, if not poor.
Yeah, yeah, there's not many of them like that,
No.
especially with the rather generous pensions. I mean, if you've been there for 20 years, you pick up effectively, I think, half of your salary, don't you? Maybe even more than that.
The pensions are unbelievably generous, but unfortunately for me, I'm only 54 and I've got to be 64 before I get it. So, hopefully I'm in fit and good fettle by the time I'm 64. There will be a good pension should it all still be running the same way. But I never, on things like that. It was part of the job. It's very generous, and I'm glad we left the EU. But I'm not the kind of person who's going to be very pious about it. So, oh no, I'm going to give it all back. No. I'm going to hopefully have a few quid in retirement, because I certainly haven't had much money since I've been involved in politics, because I've spent virtually every penny on it, on the causes I've been involved in, to some effect, but very little thanks. But that's life.
There aren't many people like you, Bill. I wish there were. I mean, coming right up to date, you left UKIP again, and you decided to join the Conservative Party. Now, I've got a couple of questions about that. First, one is why? Why did you join the Conservative Party? That's an obvious question. But perhaps not an obvious question is, have you noticed any differences in the party? Because, I mean, you were aware for it for some 13, 14 years. Is it the same party that it was under Cameron? Has it got more woke? Is it much more centralised? How cooperative are we? Do we help each other out? Are there any differences that you've seen?
Well, first and foremost, why did I join the Conservatives? During the election campaign, the local Conservatives reached out to me for help. Not that they couldn't deal with it themselves, but they knew me as a local campaigner who was of a conservative mindset, and I was happy to help them. And I was happy as well with the approach of my local association and the people within it, who were actually not ashamed to say Mrs. Thatcher's name, of the right kind of conservatism for me. Also, I strongly come to believe at that time, and even stronger since, that whilst UKIP, when it was in its pomp, our aim was, there were 2 things. One, to leave the EU, obviously. But the second thing was to force the Conservative Party to become more conservative. We believed that if we were successful and we kept on digging away, even got a few into Parliament, eventually the Conservative Party, because it's renowned for pragmatism and being successful, would think, hang on a minute, these guys are taking votes that should be ours. What should we do? I know, let's be Conservatives. And that would have driven them into a position where I'd have been happy to rejoin. Now, the Reform Party, on the other hand, Nigel's latest project, their goal appears to be to destroy the Conservatives, which I think is insane. I think it's also massive hubris to think that you can replace the world's oldest and most successful political party. And it doesn't make sense to me. So I'm against what they're trying to do. I'm also, above all things, as a member of the working class, grown up in the working classes and seen what can happen when socialists run out of control, totally against Labour to the degree where I want to do something as a civic duty to help our country to free itself from Labour. You look at those factors, the Conservatives are the only option. Doesn't mean for 1 second that I'm a great fan of everything the last Conservative government did. And I'm not, I would say I'm a critical but positive friend, but I am within the Conservative Party and loyal to it. I would like to see the Conservatives be more conservative. How has it changed? To be perfectly honest with you, the main difference at the moment, and I'm sure that will change, is that it doesn't seem as effectively organised from the top. And it also doesn't seem to have the campaign nous the campaign power, the campaign thoughts that it once did. You know, I remember turning up to help Roger Helmer for UKIP fight the Newark by-election when the MP became Robert Jenrick, who I've got great respect for. But we went down, we worked and worked. I took a team, I took busloads of people. We were there from all over the country. But we saw the Conservative office, lights on, 24/7, teams and teams of highly organised people in suits going out, running a really good campaign. And they were unbeatable, you know, and we gave it everything. And I look at what goes on now, and maybe it's only because I've not seen the whole country, so, you know, no disrespect to other areas that have got it tied down well, but it doesn't seem the same machine as it was. And I think that needs to be addressed, because one of the great strengths of this party has always been great organisation and efficiency in campaigning. And I can say that as someone who banged my head against the wall for years trying to win against the Conservatives and didn't do it very often.
Yes, yes. I remember the Newark by-election very well. And one that I also remember very well was long before that, I think 2008, if my memory serves me correctly, which was Crewe and Nantwich. It's after Gwyneth Dunwoody had died. And the Conservative Party operation there was, well, it was military. It was the only way to describe it. They had a dedicated agent in each sort of division of the constituency, each council ward, effectively. So I think there were about 5 or 6 dedicated professional agents running their own areas. And of course, the Conservative Party did very well and won that seat. I mean, what I get from a lot of people, Conservative councillors, Conservative association officers, is that CCHQ isn't fit for purpose. And I do remember a conversation I had quite a few years ago now with Mark Wallace, who I first got to know when he was campaign director of the Taxpayers Alliance. He had been at the Freedom Association before then. And Mark said, if you look at Labour, and this is when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, he said, you've got a statist party who uses a free market approach to campaigning. They get the best people. They say to some younger people, for example, what are your skills? Oh, I could do quite a bit of video editing. Oh, brilliant, come in, do something for us. And they use that free market approach. He said that the Conservative Party is supposed to be the party of the free market, and yet it uses this statist, top-down approach to campaigning. It doesn't work, it's not very good, and yet we scratch our heads, well, some people scratch their heads anyway, and say, well, why isn't this working? Well, it's pretty obvious why. It's because everything is too centralized, and there isn't enough autonomy given to associations. I mean, part of PopCon's mission, I mean, our basic mission is to roll back the Blairite reforms, a restoration of how Britain used to be, and of course, as well as driving effectively a coach and horses through all of that, we are very much a free market, freedom orientated movement inside the Conservative Party. But I do think it's important for us, and we will be meeting with some Conservative councillors and other activists very shortly, to find out what needs to be done, what reforms need to be enacted inside the party. And then we can continue, because although it isn't a sexy subject for anybody outside of the Conservative Party, it is important for members of the Conservative Party, and I think for the Conservative Party to become an effective winning machine again, which it always was. These reforms need to take place. Kemi has said that she wants to do it. We haven't heard anything yet, but she is only 2.5 months into her leadership. But I do feel that is important. Let's get everything right under the bonnet first. And once we do that, we can really start revving the engine and taking it to Labour.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. I mean, it's going to work in several ways. As you say, Kemi has only just really taken over as leader, and she's said that she's going to take her time about getting things in place. Well, okay, I can see the merits of that approach, even though it can be frustrating when there's so many open goals to go at the moment, and reform seems to be the ones with the ball all the time. But I get what she's saying. But if you get the stuff at the top right, and you get her image right, and you get her becoming more, and this is more, I think, to do with the party machine than with Kemi Badenoch herself, excuse me, portrayed as Prime Minister in waiting, with a cabinet in waiting, and then a machine that keeps pushing out that message over and over again that makes us look sober, serious, but radical. I think that will absolutely carry all before it in the coming years. I think people need to have, and this is going to seem odd coming from me, a little patience to allow that process to happen. Because for years, the Conservative Party seemed to be almost in post-traumatic shock after the Blair years, and almost afraid to call themselves Conservative. You know, all this rubbish about not wanting to be the nasty party and things like that. I think that it's time the Conservatives refound their soul and understand that in politics, people don't tend to vote for someone because they're nice. They tend to vote for someone because they think they will make sure the economy works and they'll have a job, and inflation won't destroy their savings, and their businesses will thrive if they do the right things, and law and order will be looked after, and defence, all these things. And you don't have to be soft and cuddly in order for people to vote for you. You need to look real, authentic, and professional. And I genuinely think the Conservative Party will do that. And I think when that happens, a great many people who've been tempted to look at other parties on the right of politics will come back, because the reality is the real vehicle, if you want to change a government, not if you want one issue, but if you want to change a government, it's the Conservative Party.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, what people want in a leader or a prime minister in particular is someone who is prepared to do the right things. There may be actually really difficult things to do. And maybe some people think, well, I wouldn't have the stomach to be able to do that. But they expect the leader to be able to do it. So in the final part of our conversation, Bill, tell me a little bit about Nigel Farage. I mean, he is, quite frankly, one of the most amazing politicians we've seen in the last 100 years. Somebody who really has changed the political weather. I mean, very few people have ever done that. I mean, you think of Clement Attlee in the post-war Labour government. We can think of Margaret Thatcher and the things that she did. I often think more of Peter Mandelson than Tony Blair, really, because it was Peter Mandelson was the driver behind those New Labour reforms, and indeed New Labour wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for Peter Mandelson. But you've got to add Nigel Farage to that list, and it was more amazing, really, considering that he wasn't a member of Parliament during all that time. Tell me a little bit about him. Do you think he would become a good prime minister? Do you think he might not be a particularly good prime minister? What makes him tick? What's he like?
Well, in my opinion, during my lifetime, there have been two great politicians on the centre-right of politics. One I was fortunate enough to meet was Lady Thatcher, and the other one I was fortunate to work with for many, many years was Nigel Farage. And I think they leave with great respect to others who may have achieved more in terms of office than Nigel. They leave the others behind, because Nigel's great strength, and on this he's unrivaled. This is a public school boy coming from wealth who likes the best things in life, but you can take him to a working man's club anywhere in this country and he'll sit and drink pints of beer and then go outside and smoke a cigarette with the guys and the ladies, and they'll love him and they'll think of him as one of their own. He can translate huge ideas about freedom, about patriotism, about changes into everyday language that doesn't just get across to people, it excites people. On many occasions, I was the warm-up speaker for Nigel in front of crowds that varied from 200 or 300 up to 1,000 at times. And I would stand there or sit in the background afterwards and watch people move to such passion. There'd be tears, they'd be jumping up, they'd be cheering. But the message that he was giving, if you broke it down, was a very conservative, Thatcherite style message. Now, as a man, I've had some great times with Nigel, and I owe him virtually my whole political career, because I always say that politics, an election is like a pint of beer. So you've got the body of the beer, which is what the national leader or party is achieving in terms of popularity. And then whatever the head is, that's what you've done locally. So I managed to get a decent head on my pints, and I managed to just win. But without the body of the beer, which Nigel had done, I'd have been nowhere near. So, excuse me. So I owe him a great deal in that respect. I think he's a good guy, actually. Perhaps not always as loyal to his friends as he should be, and perhaps sometimes can get sidetracked by issues that aren't necessarily to do with politics. However, I hold him in the highest respect, and I think he's a political genius. Having said all that, since he's been with the Reform Party and surrounded himself with certain people in that party, I think that he's gone down the wrong track. So whilst I sit here supporting and being part of a rival political party, and I would urge anyone who's thinking of joining Reform to think twice about it for a whole variety of reasons, which I could get into or not, it's up to you. But I seriously think that Nigel is a great man who will be remembered as being a great man who took a wrong turn and is now not acting in what really is the national interest, even though I'm sure that he, in his heart of hearts, believes he is. But he's made a mistake, and look, we all do. He's got a lot of credit in the bank for all the good things he's done. But right now, and for the last few years, he's going down the wrong path. And what has he delivered us? A Labour government who is helping to rejoin the EU through the back door, undoing all of the work that Nigel and the rest of us did for so many years.
Yes, I mean, response to that is, yes, when I stood as a Brexit Party MEP candidate in Yorkshire in 2019, I mean, I saw Nigel very close up. I mean, I remember something, a Featherstone Working Men's Club, Working Men's Club in Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, and there I was wolf whistled onto the stage. Me, a Thatcherite, wolf whistled onto the stage. They were clamouring for Anne Widdecombe. I mean, you couldn't believe it, but that was the buzz and that was the excitement, and there is no doubt that it was Nigel who generated that buzz and excitement. They didn't know me from Adam, and yet there they were wanting to shake my hand, take my autograph or whatever.
The great mistake that so many people, other than yourself, and I'd like to think may have made, by the way, just to interject, is that a lot of people start thinking that's for them. A lot of people over the years in UKIP, Brexit Party Reform, they think it's them. They're the one who's getting all this great accolade. They don't realise that 99.99% of people there, except perhaps from your mom or your wife, are there to see Nigel, not you. And that approach that story you just told there, it just made me think of it, because the number of people I've seen who've been a bit part support player coming out afterwards going, oh, did you see me? And I felt like saying, well, I did. No one else did, because no one else was really that bothered until the main man came on.
No, that's true. I think people have to be realistic about this. I mean, Anne Widdecombe was different. There's people did genuinely want to listen to Anne, but I mean, people weren't interested in me. They were interested in any of the other candidates. Exactly. I mean, you said you were we could go into some sort of detail as to why people shouldn't vote for reform, but I think we both basically agree that as conservatives, as members of the Conservative Party, well, the main reasons for not voting for reform and sticking with the Conservatives is because the vote is getting split. And if we split the vote on the right, Labour is going to get through the middle on every occasion. And the last general elections sort of proved that as well. I mean, I know there were other factors, such as people were desperate to give the Conservative Party a bloody good kicking. And I can fully understand why they felt like that. But you end up with a Labour government with 2/3 of the seats elected on about 1/3 of the vote, which this is what you get. So it is important that we unite the right. But a difficult question, I think, Bill. No easy answers. But how do we do that when you've got Richard Tyson, Nigel now committed to the destruction of the Conservative Party, which we touched on earlier. You've got Kemi saying, at least for the time being, I will never do any form of deal with Nigel Farage and reform. But we need to keep those channels of communication open, because at some point we're going to have to try and unite, if it's some form of formal electoral pact, or just some form of informal electoral arrangement. How do you think we can do this?
Well, I would argue the way to do that is to be in a position of strength. I genuinely believe that if the Conservative Party adopts a position genuinely on the centre-right, a Thatcherite in many ways position, it will not give the oxygen on policy to reform. People will always listen to Nigel speak, even if he's a panelist on a quiz show or a game show. They'll always listen to him speak. But when it comes to putting that cross in the box, unless there's a real difference, they'll go with the tried and trusted. They'll go with the party in the Conservative Party who they at least believe that should your local candidate get selected and he might put in the cabinet, he's actually going to do the job, rather than just sort of, go, oh, I'm going to go and sit on GB News for the next 7 days and not do any work. Now, this is the important thing. The Conservative Party, if it becomes or repositions itself to the right, to the centre-right, I'm not talking about anything, wild, but, just conservatism as the Thatcher years, there'll be no oxygen left. Then all you'll have is Nigel with his publicity. And by the time of the next general election, if Kemi has done as I believe she will and has properly presented herself as a Prime Minister in waiting, I think the support for reform will be so low that you might even find Nigel thinking, well, maybe I'll do something else. I'll bow out gracefully. Because knowing him quite well, I can't imagine him having lost a lot of elections, which, by the way, he was ridiculed for, and I think that was a disgrace because he had the guts to stand. But I cannot see him, after having won, wanting to be on the losers' podium and watching terrible results coming in all over the country and having to face that, as I did when I was in the council and we got obliterated when the tide changed. So I think it's all about the next few years. Conservatives, be conservative. Then all you've got is a sideshow of a great speaker in Nigel and 2 or 3 people around him who could well end up falling out with each other, because that tends to happen. So keep cool, keep our heads, and be conservative, and we will win.
Never underestimate the intelligence of the average voter. They know how the voting system works. Last time they wanted to give the Tories a good kicking, and even if Labour came in, then so what? They're now suffering under the most awful Labour government. We haven't even really touched on that, but I mean, it really is an absolutely dreadful Labour government that's falling apart at the seams, and they will find a way somehow to give Labour a good kicking at the next general election, and they will find a way to do that effectively. So the voters are always intelligent. I always believe the voters get things right, because to tell the voters that they get things wrong is not a recipe for electoral success. I normally end a podcast like this by saying, what would your message be to your respective leader? In your case, Kemi Badenoch. But as you know Nigel so well, I think, do you have messages for both of them?
Well, first of all, for all the notice Nigel would take of any message from anyone ever, my message would be, I hope he's very well. I hope he's and still enjoying his Shiraz, I believe it was, and a few pints, and managing to enjoy life. But I also want him to seriously think about what he's doing and what's happening to our country. And not everyone in our country is talented enough or famous enough to have lots of job roles where they get lots of money and they can insulate themselves against the awful economic effects of this government, and to think very seriously about whether or not he wants to condemn the British people to many more years of this. Ordinary people who love and respect him, are the very ones who are suffering because of the strategy that's being taken on. But make no mistake, reform cannot form a government at the next election. It will not happen. So all that will happen if they keep on this route is they'll split the vote again, and Labour will get in, even perhaps with a lower share of the vote. My message to Kemi, I've not been fortunate enough to meet her. First time I've actually had a party leader I haven't met in ages, decades. But I think she's got a fantastic opportunity. Fantastic. I think she's obviously a charismatic figure and someone who's very strong, plain speaking when she wants to be, and not afraid of, getting stuck in and having a good debate. I say to her, have the courage of your convictions. Don't let advisors tell you to water anything down. Be conservative, be strong, be the Prime Minister in waiting, and all of us will be behind you, supporting you. And I know that you can be our next Prime Minister.
That's the most positive message I've heard in weeks, Bill. Thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been really good talking to you, and I am going to see you soon because you're helping PopCon out as an event we have in Birmingham on the 25th of January. And if you're watching this podcast before the 25th of January, you too could come to Birmingham and listen to Dr. David Starkey and Mark Littlewood in conversation. Just go to our website, popularconservatism.com. But thanks once again, Bill. Really good seeing you. Looking forward to meeting you again very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I hope that you enjoyed that. And if you did, please like and subscribe either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts from. And please check out Popular Conservatism. Our website is popularconservatism.com. And please make sure that you sign up to receive our weekly newsletter.